Nobody walked into this camp under more pressure than Caitlin Clark, and nobody walked out with more control of the future. On the surface, it was just another USA basketball training camp. A few practices, a few evaluations, coaches watching quietly from the sideline. But underneath that calm exterior, something much bigger was happening. This wasn't about shaking off rust or getting back into rhythm. This was a silent power shift. One player arrived with questions hanging over her name, doubts fueled by injuries and time away. Another arrived with hype, expectations, and a growing online fan base. By the end of day 2, those narratives didn't just change, they flipped completely. For months, the conversation around Clark had drifted in a dangerous direction. The rookie who once shattered records and bent defenses to her will had barely been seen. Injuries stacked up, games disappeared from the schedule. And when a generational player goes quiet for long enough, the basketball world doesn't wait patiently. It starts wondering. Was that historic rookie season the ceiling? Had the league already caught up? And more importantly, when the lights came back on, would she still be the same player? That uncertainty followed her straight into camp, even if no one said it out loud. Every rep mattered. Every possession was being evaluated. This wasn't just a workout, it was an unspoken test. At the same time, others saw opportunity. Camp is where roles are claimed and hierarchies are formed, and some players arrived believing this was their moment to move up the ladder. Among them was Angel Reese, a name that's generated nonstop buzz, debate, and expectation. Fans expected fireworks. Analysts watched closely. The assumption was simple. This would be a battle for the spotlight. But what actually unfolded didn't look like a competition at all. It looked like separation. Quiet, undeniable separation that didn't need trash talk or headlines to announce itself. Because while some players were trying to prove they belonged, Clark was doing something far more dangerous. She was making everyone else better. The tempo shifted when she touched the floor. The reads came faster. The spacing made sense. Coaches leaned forward instead of checking clipboards. This wasn't just a comeback story in progress. This was a statement being delivered in real time. And the most important part? She wasn't forcing it. No hero ball, no trying to remind people who she was. She played like someone who already knew where this was heading. By the end of the first few sessions, the conversation inside the gym no longer matched the noise outside of it. This wasn't about who looked good in drills, it was about who the program naturally bent around. USA Basketball Women's National Team isn't built on hype or social media moments. It's built on trust, control, and players who elevate everyone on the floor. And without a single announcement, without a single headline, it became clear that one player wasn't just back, she was positioning herself as the foundation of what comes next. And that's where this story really begins, because once you understand what this camp actually revealed, you start to see why some futures are suddenly accelerating, while others may already be narrowing. What made this moment so heavy for Caitlin Clark wasn't just the injuries, it was the silence that followed them. When a star goes down once, people wait. When it happens again, they worry. But when it keeps happening, the tone changes. The conversation shifts from sympathy to skepticism, even if no one wants to admit it. Clark's sophomore season didn't unravel all at once. It chipped away at her rhythm piece by piece. One issue faded, another popped up. Just enough recovery to give hope, followed by another setback that pulled it away again. 13 games, that was it. 13 appearances after a rookie season that completely rewrote expectations. For a player used to answering questions with dominance, there was suddenly nothing to point to except potential and memory. And that's where the real pressure crept in, not from critics yelling online, but from the unspoken reality of elite sports. Time doesn't pause for anyone, not even generational talent. While Clark was rehabbing, adjusting, and trying to get her body right, the league kept moving. New names emerged, new narratives formed. Every missed game gave space for doubt to grow. And the more time passed, the louder those doubts became. People started asking questions they never would have a year earlier. Could she stay healthy? Would the burst come back? Was the speed that made her dangerous still there, or had it been dulled by months of caution and recovery? 5 months away from competitive basketball is an eternity at this level. It's not just about conditioning or timing, it's about trust. Trust in your body, trust in your instincts, trust that when you plant your foot and explode, something won't go wrong again. Clark admitted that part herself. Injuries isolate you. You're around the team, but you're not really in it. You watch instead of react. You think instead of flow. And when you finally returned, you're not just proving something to coaches or fans, you're proving it to yourself. That's a weight most people never see, but it was there the moment she stepped onto the floor at camp. What made this camp different from any normal return was the timing. This wasn't a casual tune-up or a low-stakes run. This was the start of a new Olympic cycle. Evaluations weren't theoretical, they were foundational. Coaches weren't just asking who looks good now, but who can be trusted 2, 4, even 6 years down the line. Every possession was a data point. Every hesitation mattered. Clark wasn't fighting for attention. She was fighting the idea that her window might be closing faster than expected. And that kind of pressure doesn't always show up in box scores. Sometimes it shows up in how a player carries themselves before the first whistle even blows.
Walking into that gym, Clark wasn't just returning from injury. She was stepping back into a conversation that had quietly moved on without her. The only way back into it wasn't noise or promises. It was control. And the moment she finally put the ball on the floor, that's exactly where the story began to change. The shift didn't happen after a speech or a highlight play. It happened almost immediately, before anyone had time to overanalyze it. The first time Caitlin Clark touched the ball, the tension that had been hanging over the gym quietly disappeared. Not because she forced anything, and not because she tried to remind people who she was, but because everything suddenly looked normal, natural, comfortable. The movements were clean, the reads were quick. There was no hesitation in her steps, no second-guessing in her decisions. For a player coming off months away from competition, that alone spoke volumes. What stood out wasn't one shot falling or one pass connecting, it was the rhythm. Clark didn't play like someone testing her body. She played like someone who trusted it. She pushed the pace without forcing it, changing speeds at will, keeping defenders off balance before they even realized they were behind. When she pulled up, it was decisive. When she passed, it was early and on time. Coaches weren't watching her to see if she could keep up. They were watching how quickly the game bent around her. That's when the evaluation quietly shifted from, "Is she ready?" to, "How do we build with this?" The nervous energy she admitted to feeling didn't last long. She said the moment she started warming up, everything felt familiar again, and that familiarity showed. The ball didn't stick. Teammates moved with more confidence when she was on the floor. Spacing improved. Cuts came earlier. Fast breaks actually looked like fast breaks. These are the small details coaches notice instantly, the ones that don't show up on stat sheets but decide who runs the offense and who waits their turn. By the end of the first session, it was clear this wasn't a slow ramp-up. Clark wasn't easing back into form. She had arrived already in it. Her pace alone created advantages. Defenders were forced to react instead of anticipate. Passing lanes opened that didn't exist for anyone else. And the most telling part, she wasn't dominating the ball to do it. She was directing traffic, pulling defenders just far enough out of position to let others eat. That's the kind of impact that doesn't need volume to be loud. Observers started noticing something else too, the smile. It wasn't performative or forced. It was the kind of expression that shows up when a player realizes their body is finally doing what their mind is asking again. That joy carried through every rep, every transition push, every read made a half-second faster than expected. The question marks that followed her into camp didn't vanish because someone said they should. They vanished because the game itself answered them. And once that happened, once the room collectively understood that Clark wasn't just healthy, but fully herself again, the camp stopped being about whether she belonged. It became about how everyone else would adjust to her presence and who would thrive alongside it. What made the coaching staff lock in so quickly on Caitlin Clark wasn't hype or reputation. At this level, none of that matters once the ball goes up. What matters is control. Control of pace, control of space, control of moments that can swing games before they ever reach the scoreboard. And almost immediately, Clark showed she had all of it. She wasn't just playing within the system, she was organizing it. Every possession with her on the floor felt intentional, like there was a plan unfolding in real time. That's why comments from people like Kara Lawson carried so much weight. When Lawson said Clark looked good on both ends, it wasn't coach speak. Defense is where trust is earned in USA basketball settings. Anyone can score and practice. Not everyone competes, communicates, and stays connected on the other end. Clark was sliding her feet, reading passing lanes, and rotating early, not late. She wasn't conserving energy or picking spots. She was fully engaged, and that told coaches she wasn't protecting her body anymore. She trusted it. Then there was the decision-making. Clark didn't hunt highlights, she hunted advantages. When the defense showed help, she punished it. When they stayed home, she took what they gave her. That balance is rare, especially from players coming off long layoffs. Most try to prove they're still dangerous. Clark proved she was still dependable. The ball moved faster with her. Teammates looked more confident taking shots they might hesitate on with someone else running the offense. That's the kind of influence coaches recognize immediately because it translates to international play, where mistakes get exposed fast.
The reactions from the sidelines said more than any quote ever could. Nods instead of notes, smiles instead of silence. The staff wasn't debating whether Clark could help, they were watching how high the ceiling could go with her in control. That's a critical difference. At camps like this, some players are fighting to stay in the conversation, others quietly ended. Clark did the latter without saying a word. Her presence simplified decisions that are usually complicated. And once that trust is established, it tends to snowball. Coaches start pairing you with different lineups to see what works. They put you in tougher situations to see how you respond. Clark didn't flinch. If anything, she thrived. She communicated, she adjusted, she took responsibility when possessions broke down. These are the moments where roles get defined long before any roster is announced. By the time the rest of the camp settled into rhythm, the coaching staff already knew who they were watching. Because this wasn't just about how Clark played, it was about how quickly she reminded everyone why teams at this level are built around players like her. And once that realization set in, the focus naturally shifted to something bigger. Who fits best next to her, and who might not keep up? The moment Aaliyah Boston stepped onto the floor with Caitlin Clark, the entire dynamic of camp changed. This wasn't chemistry developing, it was chemistry revealed. No hesitation, no learning curve, just two players operating like they already knew what the next read would be before it happened. In a setting where most connections take days, sometimes weeks to form, theirs showed up instantly, and that caught the coaching staff's attention right away. It started with the little things, the timing of cuts, the angle of screens, the way Boston rolled with purpose instead of waiting to see what Clark would do. Clark didn't need to signal or slow the play down. One glance was enough. Boston read it, moved, and the ball arrived exactly where it needed to be. Not late, not early, right on time. These are the kinds of plays that look simple until you realize how rare they actually are, especially in a national team environment where players are still figuring each other out. There was one sequence that made everything obvious. Clark came off a handoff, turned the corner with a burst that forced the defense to collapse, and without breaking stride, slipped a pass through traffic to Boston, cutting to the rim. The window was tight, the margin for error was non-existent, but the pass landed perfectly, and Boston finished it with ease. They smiled at each other as they ran back, not because it was flashy, but because it felt automatic. That moment told coaches more than a dozen drills ever could. What makes this connection so valuable is how it pressures defenses without needing volume scoring.
When Clark pushes tempo, Boston is already sprinting to her spot. When Clark slows the game down, Boston seals early. Defenders can't load up on one without exposing themselves to the other. That balance is gold in international play, where spacing is tighter and reads have to be immediate. Together, they don't just create points, they create control. Most players at camp were still learning tendencies. Who likes the ball high? Who prefers it on the move? Who needs space to operate? Clark and Boston skipped that phase entirely. They already spoke the same basketball language, built over an entire season together. And in a camp designed to evaluate future cores, that familiarity is a massive advantage. Coaches don't have to imagine what it could look like, they're seeing it live. Once that connection became clear, the conversation shifted again. It was no longer just about Clark's return or Boston's presence. It was about how dangerous they are together and how much easier roster construction becomes when you already have a guard-big pairing that works at this level. From that point on, everything else at camp started to feel like pieces being evaluated around a foundation that was already set. Once that foundation started forming, an uncomfortable comparison naturally followed, not because anyone announced it, but because camp environments make contrasts impossible to ignore. And this is where Angel Reese quietly became part of the conversation in a way many didn't expect. To be clear, nothing here was said outright. There were no public critiques, no dramatic moments, no headlines coming out of the gym. But when you look closely at how camps like this operate, patterns begin to emerge, and those patterns are what sparked so much discussion among analysts and fans watching from the outside. Coming into camp, there was plenty of buzz around Reese's potential role. Her rebounding, physicality, and intensity are undeniable strengths, and reports suggested she was viewed as someone who could bring edge and toughness to the group. But as practices unfolded, it became increasingly clear that the direction of the team was being shaped around pace, spacing, and quick decision-making. That's not a judgment, it's a stylistic reality. And according to multiple analysts, that style naturally elevated some players while making it harder for others to stand out in the same way. Rumors and online chatter began circling almost immediately. Some reports claimed Reese struggled to consistently impact the flow of play as the rotations tightened. Others suggested her role started to look more situational rather than central, especially as chemistry-driven pairings like Clark and Boston took priority reps. Again, none of this was officially stated, but in environments like this, opportunity is the loudest signal. When possessions matter and coaches are watching closely, the ball tends to find the players they trust most to keep things organized.
What made the comparison uncomfortable wasn't talent, it was fit. Clark's game thrives on speed, early reads, and movement without the ball. Reese's strengths lean more toward physical presence, rebounding battles, and half-court toughness. Both have value. The speculation comes from whether those values align with the direction USA basketball appears to be leaning into for the next cycle. Several analysts noted that as the tempo increased, Reese's opportunities to influence plays became more limited, while Clark's influence expanded almost effortlessly. There were also visible moments that fueled discussion. Clark's chemistry extended naturally to multiple teammates, creating a sense of flow that coaches clearly appreciated. Reese, by contrast, seemed to be working harder to force her impact, a common challenge in short caps where roles aren't clearly defined yet. Some observers interpreted that frustration as competitiveness. Others saw it as a sign that her ideal role on this roster might be narrower than expected. Either way, the contrast was impossible to miss for those paying close attention. And that's what made this comparison so delicate. It wasn't about one player failing and another succeeding. It was about momentum, about how quickly a team identity can form, and how unforgiving that process can be for players whose games don't naturally sync with it. As speculation continues to swirl, one thing feels increasingly clear. As Clark's influence grows, the margin for fitting into that vision gets smaller. And in a camp designed to define the future, that reality can change trajectories faster than anyone anticipates. At camps like this, coaches rarely say everything out loud. They don't need to. Their reactions fill in the gaps. The pauses, the body language, the way certain players are used and others aren't, tells a story that never makes it into a press release. And when you started watching those details closely, a clear pattern formed around Caitlin Clark. The coaching staff didn't just evaluate her, they leaned into her. They trusted her with responsibility that doesn't get handed out casually. You could see it in how lineups were structured. Clark wasn't being hidden or protected. She was being tested, then tested again. Different combinations, different looks, late clock situations, tempo changes. Coaches weren't checking to see if she could survive. They were checking how far she could stretch the group. That distinction matters. Players on the bubble often get short, scripted opportunities. Core pieces get freedom. Clark was playing with freedom, and that's something coaches only give when they're already convinced. The praise that did come publicly was carefully chosen, and that made it even louder. When Lawson spoke about Clark, she didn't focus on highlights or scoring. She talked about completeness, effort on both ends, readiness. Those are evaluation terms, not compliments. They signal that a player isn't being judged on potential anymore, but on reliability. And reliability is what earns minutes when games actually matter. Then there was the presence of Sue Bird, watching closely, occasionally stepping in, always paying attention. When someone with Bird's role and experience reacts positively, it carries weight inside the program. Observers noted how often Bird seemed engaged during Clark's reps, tracking how she handled pressure and how teammates responded to her direction. That kind of attention isn't random, it's intentional, it's forward-looking. Meanwhile, the contrast elsewhere was subtle but telling. Some players rotated in and out quickly, others didn't see the same responsibilities twice. That doesn't mean decisions were finalized, but it does mean priorities were emerging. Coaches gravitate toward players who simplify the game. Clark did that consistently. When she was on the floor, things made sense. Possessions flowed. Mistakes didn't spiral. That calm influence is exactly what staffs value when projecting ahead to international competition. Reading between the lines, it became clear that this camp wasn't just about evaluating talent. It was about identifying anchors, players who stabilize everything around them. Clark checked every box without demanding attention or forcing the issue. And once coaches recognize that kind of presence, the conversation shifts permanently from "Can she help us?" to "How do we build the rest of this around her?" What became clear by the end of camp is that this wasn't just about filling a roster for the next tournament. This was about direction. USA Basketball Women's National Team doesn't think in short bursts. It thinks in cycles. 4-year windows, 8-year visions, and everything about how this camp unfolded pointed toward a long-term plan quietly locking into place. The decisions being made weren't reactive, they were intentional, measured, and future-facing. This wasn't about who looked good today, it was about who could carry the weight of what comes next.
The next Olympic cycle brings enormous expectations. The 2028 Summer Olympics won't just be another tournament. They'll be on home soil, under global scrutiny, with pressure that magnifies every weakness. USA Basketball knows that talent alone doesn't survive moments like that. You need players who can absorb chaos, stabilize teammates, and impose order when momentum swings. That's why camps like this matter so much. They aren't auditions in the traditional sense. They're stress tests for leadership, adaptability, and trust. This is where Clark's journey through adversity quietly became an asset instead of a concern. Players who've never been challenged physically or mentally can struggle when things don't go according to plan. Clark has already lived through that discomfort. Months on the sideline, questions she couldn't answer on the court, a season that forced patience instead of dominance. According to people close to the program, that experience changed how she carries herself. She doesn't rush moments anymore. She manages them. And that's exactly what international basketball demands. USA Basketball has seen this story before. The program has always thrived when it identifies a central figure early and allows the system to grow around that presence. Not someone who demands attention, but someone who earns it organically. Clark's ability to blend elite skill with connective play makes that process smoother.
Younger players can plug in without fear. Veterans don't feel threatened. The hierarchy becomes clear without being spoken. That clarity is priceless when championships are decided by details. And that's why this camp felt different. There was no rush to crown anyone publicly, no dramatic declarations, but the framework was obvious to anyone watching closely. Lineups began to reflect compatibility instead of experimentation. Emphasis shifted toward pace, spacing, and decision-making, traits that translate globally. Everything pointed toward sustainability, not flash, toward building something that could last multiple tournaments instead of peaking once. The long game is already in motion. What we saw wasn't a comeback or a hot stretch, it was alignment between player, philosophy, and future. And once that alignment clicks, USA Basketball doesn't pivot easily. It commits, which means this camp may eventually be remembered not for who made it, but for the moment the program quietly decided who it would grow around for years to come. By the time camp wrapped up, the biggest takeaway wasn't a stat line or a depth chart projection. It was a realization, a shift that didn't need an announcement because it was already visible in how everything moved. This wasn't just Caitlin Clark returning from injury. This was the moment the program began to move with her at the center of it. What started as questions about health and rhythm quietly turned into certainty about leadership and direction. USA Basketball has always been ruthless in how it evaluates the future. Past success doesn't buy protection, and hype doesn't guarantee trust. You earn your place by stabilizing the game when pressure builds. That's exactly what Clark did. She didn't demand the torch, she didn't ask for it. She made the case so convincingly that it was passed without ceremony. Coaches responded, teammates followed. The structure of camp adjusted around her presence. That's how transitions actually happen at this level, not loudly, but decisively. What makes this moment different is timing. This isn't the end of a cycle, it's the beginning of one. The expectations tied to the next few years are massive, and the margin for error is thin. But that's also why this shift matters so much. Clark represents continuity, a bridge between eras. Someone who understands the weight of the jersey, but also brings a modern game that fits where basketball is heading. That combination is rare, and when programs find it, they don't hesitate. For others, this camp may be remembered as a missed opportunity or a lesson in fit. For Clark, it marked something far more important. Not a comeback, not redemption, ownership. The kind that doesn't show up in headlines right away, but defines what follows. The kind that reshapes roles, expectations, and long-term plans without saying a word. The torch has been passed, not because someone stepped aside, but because someone stepped forward at exactly the right moment. And if this camp was any indication, the next chapter of USA Basketball isn't just beginning, it already knows who's leading it.